Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are undertaking a journey to one of the most visually spectacular and frankly bizarre environmental anomalies on the entire planet,
We're heading, virtually at least, halfway across the globe.
right into the heart of Central Asia. Specifically, we're going to the vast, sparsely populated Karakum Desert in Turkmenistan.
And we're looking for a hole in the ground. But this isn't, just any crack in the desert floor. This is a massive gaping pit.
A pit that has been on fire, relentlessly, dramatically, for what is now getting close to half a century.
And that hole, its formal name, is the Darvaza gas crater.
But that's not the name that seized the global imagination, is it? The one that you see in every documentary, every social media post.
No, that would be the door to hell, or sometimes the gates of hell.
And when you encounter the images, it's actually shockingly easy to understand how those names stuck.
Oh, absolutely. You're talking about this enormous circular wound in the earth, maybe 70 meters wide, just choked with this constantly roaring, churning fire.
At night, especially, the sources all describe it as this unearthly spectacle. It glows with the intensity of a gigantic sort of alien campfire, and you can see it for miles across the pitch-black desert.
And here's the core of what we're digging into today. This is the central paradox of Darvaza.
Yeah,
If you just showed someone a picture with no context,
you're right.
they'd assume it was geological, some kind of supervolcanic vent or maybe a rare natural fissure where gas just happens to find a way to the surface and ignite.
But that assumption is completely wrong.
100% wrong.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so fascinating. This intense, almost biblical spectacle is entirely human-made.
An accident.
A massive, ongoing, unintended consequence of an engineering mishap, most likely from the Cold War era, from Soviet drilling operations.
So they were looking for natural gas.
Exactly. Trying to unlock the region's massive reserves, and instead they opened a door they couldn't close.
Okay, so let's unpack this monumental failure and how it became a permanent fixture on the global landscape. Our sources today are, well, they're complex.
They really are. They're sometimes even conflicting. You have these old Soviet accounts that are shrouded in secrecy. Then you have oral histories from local Turkmen geologists, which tell a different story.
And now we have modern satellite data, climate analysis, and these incredible accounts from extreme explorers who've actually gone down into the inferno.
So our mission today is to navigate all of that. We want to find the true story that's hiding behind the legend.
And to understand the mechanics, why this fire just won't go out.
And, crucially, to determine its real global significance, scientifically, environmentally. We need to know what the door to hell really is, and what it teaches us about our own impact on the planet.
Let's start with that spectacle, the sheer visual power of it, because that's the engine that drives its fame.
You have to picture the location first. The Karakum Desert. The name actually means black sand in Turkic languages.
And it is vast. Flat, unforgiving, and almost empty of people. We're about 260 kilometers north of Ashgabat, the capital.
And this isn't just any desert. This is a desert sitting on top of a treasure trove of hydrocarbons. The whole story of Darvaza is defined by the fact that this specific region is incredibly rich in natural gas.
Let's get a real sense of the scale, because photos can sometimes, flatten things. We're talking about a crater that's roughly 60 to 70 meters wide.
That's about 200 to 230 feet across.
And it plunges down about 30 meters or 100 feet deep. It's big enough to swallow several houses.
Yeah, you could easily lay the Statue of Liberty down inside it. And when you stand at the rim, the sources say the effect is just dizzying.
You've got these jagged, fractured rock walls dropping down to a floor that's all broken into plates and fissures.
And that entire surface is just a continuous field of fire.
Mm.
It isn't one smooth blaze either.
No, the descriptions paint a much more complex picture, a dynamic environment.
Exactly. You have dozens, maybe hundreds of smaller, flickering flames dancing across the broken ground, and then those are punctuated by a few larger, roaring jets that are just shooting upwards with intense pressure.
And the sound.
The sound must be overwhelming. It's not a cozy, crackling fire. It's described as a constant, low, thunderous roar. The sound of massive amounts of high-pressure gas being ejected and instantly consumed.
And that orange glow against the black, remote canvas of the Karakum night, it really does fulfill that description of looking like an infernal fire pit.
Which brings us back to the nicknames, that powerful contrast.
You've got the ones everyone knows, the dramatic, almost terrifyingly biblical names: Door to Hell, Gates of Hell.
Those are the names of legend of sensational travel writing.
But there's this great political irony, isn't there? The government, they recognized it as a major tourist draw, so they tried to control the narrative.
They did. They gave it an official national label. They called it the Shining of Karakum.
Which is, it's a lovely poetic image, the desert shining.
Yeah.
But why do you think that rebranding just completely failed? Why did the dark, dramatic nickname dominate the global conversation?
I think because the human mind is just drawn to extremes, to the sublime. The idea of a quiet, shining place is nice, but it's easily dismissed.
But a man-made wound in the earth that acts as a gateway to the underworld.
That's compelling. It's a visible, tangible symbol of destruction and constant raw energy release. The name Door to Hell perfectly captures the inherent danger and the uncontrollable nature of the accident itself.
And I think that tension is key. The official desire for control versus the reality of this permanent, uncontrollable failure. It's been a scar on the landscape for more than 5 decades now. An unintended monument to the power of natural gas.
And the persistence of that fire for decades. That's what forces us to really dig into the messy history of how it all started.
Because if you just rely on the internet myths, you get a very clean, very specific date, 1971.
Right. But the actual historical record, once you start looking at the sources, is anything but clean.
Okay, so let's lay out that classic 1971 legend first, because it sets the scene, even if the timeline is, well, questionable.
The standard story goes like this. Soviet geologists, they're drilling in the Karakum in '71. Their goal is finding massive gas reserves because the USSR was desperate to capitalize on its hydrocarbon wealth.
And they hit something they weren't expecting.
They inadvertently punctured a vast, shallow underground gas pocket. And that triggered a catastrophic geological failure. The ground just gives way.
The entire drilling rig collapses, creating the crater we see today and potentially swallowing the rig itself.
And the decision they made next was driven purely by safety concerns, or so the story goes.
Absolutely. This massive rush of gas is escaping. It's mostly methane, but it's mixed with other, heavier, more poisonous hydrocarbon fumes.
So they're fearing these toxic gases will seep out, contaminate the area, maybe threaten the sparse settlements nearby. So the engineers make a fateful decision.
They set it on fire to flare it off.
And the expectation, the critical assumption, was that this would be a short, dramatic blaze. It would consume the escaping gas and then just burn itself out.
In a few days, maybe a week, tops, once that initial pocket was exhausted.
And that's the classic punchline of the whole story. They lit it, expecting a quick fix, and the gas just never, ever stopped flowing.
But this is where the history gets so messy. Why is it so murky? You'd think such a massive event would have clear, archived records.
Well, there are a couple of key reasons, and they're very much tied to the Soviet era. First, the Soviet Union operated under this veil of extreme secrecy.
Especially when it came to industrial accidents.
Oh, absolutely. Publicizing a massive engineering blunder that resulted in the catastrophic waste of a valuable state resource it was just unthinkable. And second, the records that do exist are often poor, fragmented, or they're based on these rushed internal reports designed to shift blame, not establish facts.
So that clean 1971 date we see repeated everywhere it's unreliable. It's based more on oral histories passed down from local Turkmen geologists than on any verifiable Soviet document.
Precisely. And this leads to the alternative timelines we find in newer research. Some of those local accounts suggest the initial collapse might have happened much earlier, maybe in the mid-1960s.
So the crater could have just been sitting there as a non-burning hollow for years.
For a very long time, potentially. And that distinction, the difference between the initial collapse and the moment of ignition, that's critical.
Because if the hole existed but didn't burn, that completely changes the timeline of the emissions.
It does. And modern scientific analysis strongly supports this idea. Researchers, including some who presented findings at the European Geosciences Union, they've used satellite monitoring, analysis of older imagery, and they've coupled that with refining those local oral histories.
And what did they find?
Their findings suggest that the intense, visible burning phase, the spectacle we associate with the door to hell, it might have only begun much, much later, closer to 1987 or 1988.
Wow. Okay, that shifts the whole timeline by 15, maybe 20 years. That's a massive discrepancy.
It is. It's a compelling coincidence, too. If the fire really started in the late 80s, it means it was lit on the eve of the Soviet collapse.
But it also means that for decades, a massive unlit crater was just venting extremely potent, unburned methane directly into the atmosphere.
which, from a short-term climate perspective, is arguably much worse. That ignition in the late 80s might have been a second attempt to deal with an invisible problem that had become a significant health and environmental hazard.
So that recontextualizes the whole story. The importance for you, the listener, isn't so much the exact year, but the consequence.
Right. Regardless of whether the collapse was 65 and the fire was 88 or it all happened in 71, the undisputed fact remains.
Human drilling operations punctured a high-pressure gas reservoir, caused the landscape to fail, and a subsequent engineering decision to flare poisonous gas created a half-century-long environmental and geological feature.
And this wasn't a planned flare. This was a flare born of panic and a complete lack of foresight about the sheer volume of gas they had accidentally tapped into.
A monumental, permanent, open-air pipeline failure, and that context is absolutely crucial to understanding the science of why this catastrophe just refuses to end.
The question everyone asks is, why hasn't it just run out of fuel?
Right, most industrial accidents, they burn out pretty quickly.
They exhaust the local supply of gas. But Darvaza sits over a resource so vast that it just behaves differently.
And we're back to that critical fact about Turkmenistan's geology. It holds some of the world's largest natural gas reserves.
The Karakum Desert is basically just a massive lid over a truly monumental volume of gas.
That's it. The crater isn't burning some small isolated pocket. It's connected, through the porous rock structure, directly to the primary gas reservoir deep below. The geology itself is, unfortunately, perfectly cooperating with the disaster.
How does it act as a perpetual pipeline?
Well, beneath the surface, the rock is highly fractured and porous. That creates these natural pathways, these fissures. When the drilling breached that gas-rich layer, it essentially created an open channel, a release valve.
Connecting the high-pressure gas deep underground directly to the surface.
It functions as an entirely self-sustaining system. It just keeps feeding methane-rich gas to the open flame at a continuous and a very significant rate. It's a gigantic, accidental, open-air gas flare that needs zero maintenance. It just runs itself. I think NASA's Earth Observatory even categorized it as a long-burning energy release point visible from space.
And that energy release is immense. The temperatures involved are staggering. Reports from people who've been near the rim, they all confirm it. Measurements suggest the flame temperatures, especially in those roaring jets, reach close to 1,000 degrees Celsius.
1,000 degrees C. That's the temperature of molten lava. It's hot enough to glow white or blue, not just orange. Standing at the rim must feel like leaning over an industrial blast furnace.
Intensely dangerous. The heat radiation at the edge is nearly unbearable. And that's the environment that the Canadian explorer George Carunis voluntarily descended into in 2013.
On that National Geographic expedition, tell us about that descent. It sounds like something from a science fiction movie.
It required extreme preparation. Carunis wore a specially designed heat-resistant suit, and he relied on this elaborate system of ropes and harnesses anchored at the rim to get down.
What did he say it felt like down there?
He famously compared the experience to being a baked potato inside a convection oven. The air is thick with heat, sulfurous gases, the roar is deafening. But it wasn't just for the thrill, it was highly scientific.
He was there to collect soil samples, right? From the very bottom, near the burning pockets of gas.
Exactly, to see if anything could possibly survive down there.
And this leads us to this surprising pivot in the whole narrative. The discovery of life thriving in what you'd assume is a completely sterilized, hellish environment.
It was a profound finding. Carunis' team discovered thriving populations of heat-tolerant bacteria, we call them extremophiles, in the high-temperature, toxic soil samples they collected.
What allows them to live there?
They found Methanotrophs bacteria that actually consume methane as their primary source of energy, and specific types of thermophiles or heat lovers adapted to the high temperatures and acidic conditions. Life literally adapted to feed off the source of the disaster.
So this accidental human-made wound becomes an unplanned, open-air laboratory for life under the most intense conditions imaginable.
And this gives the crater massive relevance to the field of astrobiology. Scientists see sites like this as Earth-based analogs for conditions we might find on other worlds.
How does this fiery hole relate to space exploration?
It mirrors environments we might find on moons like Titan, or even on early Earth. Astrobiologists are really interested in habitats where hydrocarbons, heat, and pressure combine. Darvaza provides a real-world dynamic example of how life can persist and adapt, drawing energy from geological processes we used to think were too extreme.
It shows the boundaries of where life can exist are much wider than we thought.
It's a remarkable scientific silver lining to an environmental disaster. This terrifying door to hell is also, in fact, a thriving nursery for tiny, incredibly tough organisms.
But that fascinating discovery, it doesn't offset the significant cost this ongoing fire presents to the planet's atmosphere.
No, it doesn't. And we have to pivot now to that climate cost,
Mhm.
because when you look at that fire, you immediately think of waste and pollution. But the environmental question around Darvaza is actually incredibly nuanced.
It's a choice between two bad outcomes.
It's the classic flaring dilemma, just magnified by the scale and the 50-year duration of this event. To understand it, we have to revisit the basics: the escaping gas, methane, CH, versus what it becomes when it's burned, which is CHEROs.
We hear about Kuros constantly, but remind us why that unburned methane, the CH, is the greater short-term threat.
Methane is just an extremely potent greenhouse gas. It doesn't stay in the atmosphere as long as Caro, but its ability to trap heat is vastly superior in the short term. Over a 20-year period, methane has a warming potential that is roughly 80 times greater than the same amount of Caros.
So every bit of methane leaking directly into the atmosphere is an immediate, powerful climate accelerator.
That is the painful trade-off at Darvaza. You have two primary scenarios for the gas escaping from this ruptured field.
Scenario 1, the unlit crater, which, as we said, might have been the reality for years.
If it's unlit, huge amounts of highly potent methane just leak directly and invisibly into the atmosphere. A massive short-term warming problem.
And Scenario 2, the current situation, the constant burning.
When methane burns, it oxidizes. It converts into co-euro and water vapor. Now, co-euros is still a greenhouse gas, but is far less potent per molecule. The burning also, unfortunately, releases other pollutants like nitrogen oxides and particulates.
So the fire is a constant visible source of co-pollution.
But it's also a giant environmental plug.
Mm-hmm.
It's converting that highly potent short-term warming methane into the less potent longer-term warming co-euro before it can escape.
A choice between a...
The numbers are important for context. One detailed analysis estimated that in 2018, the crater was releasing about 50,500 tons of co-euro equivalent just from the flaring alone.
50,000 tons. Can you put that in perspective for us?
Well, if you compare that to, say, passenger vehicles, an average car emits about 4.6 metric tons of co-euro a year. The Darvaza crater's annual output is roughly equivalent to the emissions of over 10,000 cars.
A single hole in the ground generating the emissions of a small town's entire fleet of cars.
It's not insignificant, but that data also reveals something interesting about the flow rate. That estimate had dropped by 2021, down to about 37,600 tons of co-euro equivalent.
A hint that the fire's intensity is dynamic.
Exactly. And even with that reduction, Darvaza is a very visible symbol of a much, much larger systemic problem in Turkmenistan.
Tell us about that broader context.
Turkmenistan is a hydrocarbon giant, but its infrastructure is old, a lot of it dating back to the Soviet era, and it's often poorly maintained. The International Energy Agency has repeatedly identified Turkmenistan as one of the world's top methane emitters.
So Darvaza is the spectacular one, but it's not the only one.
Far from it. It sits in a landscape riddled with hundreds of less visible, systemic leaks and routine flaring from its oil and gas facilities. The door to hell is the literal, spectacular symptom of a nation grappling with widespread, often unmanaged, systemic methane waste.
A powerful symbol of inefficiency and environmental neglect.
Exactly. It's the symbolic hole of waste, reflecting a deeper, less visible issue that international organizations have been pressuring the government to address for years.
So we've established it's a massive, dangerous, polluting engineering wound. And yet somehow it's also Turkmenistan's single most iconic and successful tourist attraction. How does a disaster become a national landmark?
It's a fascinating case study in narrative power and the lure of the extreme. Despite the logistical nightmare of getting there and Turkmenistan's highly restrictive visa policies, Darvaza draws serious travelers from all over the world.
And it's not an easy country to visit. You can't just book a flight and rent a car.
Not at all. It requires extensive paperwork, mandatory guided tours. The journey itself involves hours of hard driving in 4x4s across difficult, unmarked desert tracks. It's a real commitment.
But the experience, when they arrive, must be profoundly unique.
It's often described as primordial. Travelers camped in yurts or tents near the crater's rim, and they spend the night just gazing into this colossal, continuous fire. The silence of the desert, coupled with that deafening roar of the gas, creates this otherworldly sensory experience.
It's perfect media fodder. The images, the story, the nicknames, they're impossible to forget.
And that media fame, that gateway to hell framing, it puts the political tension into sharp relief. You have one of the world's most secretive, tightly controlled regimes, and their defining international symbol is this accidental, freely burning, uncontrollable fire.
That must drive the government crazy. They are obsessed with order and control, but they cannot control this geological failure they inherited.
It's a fascinating political contradiction. The regime has shown a really mixed attitude toward the crater over the decades. It's oscillated between promotion and suppression.
How have they tried to promote it?
At times, they've tried to rebrand it as a testament to their nation's vast resource wealth. The most prominent example was in 2018, when a major desert car rally was staged in the region.
And the route included the crater.
It was a significant, iconic overnight stop. They were essentially integrating the door to hell into their national brand of adventure and power.
Using a symbol of engineering failure as a backdrop for a high-tech sports event, that's a bold move.
It's an attempt to master the narrative, but that effort is constantly undercut by the very real environmental and economic issues. It's hard to promote a landmark that's actively wasting millions in revenue and contributing to climate change.
So the political will to close it down, which we've seen multiple times, stems from that conflict between national pride and resource management.
Precisely. It's a symbol of incredible waste and a Cold War failure that they just can't master. And that's pressure, both internal and external, has forced repeated, serious attempts to finally extinguish the flames.
The enduring legend of the door to hell is that it's an eternal flame. But the reality, according to the latest research and on-the-ground observations, is that the fire is actually fading.
The end might actually be in sight, and this is a story that's been playing out politically for over a decade. The first high-level mandate came back in 2010.
Right, when the former president ordered officials to look into closing the crater.
And the focus then was largely on protecting adjacent gas field development and stopping the resource wastage. But that initial effort, it clearly didn't work. The fire continued strongly through the 2010s.
But the pressure kept growing.
It did. And the efforts became more urgent, more formalized. In January 2022, the government officially announced a renewed, concrete desire to extinguish the fire. The rationale was much clearer this time: environmental damage, unacceptable waste of resources, and potential health risks.
So they created a commission. But how certain are we that they're actually making progress this time?
We have concrete, measurable evidence. This is where that satellite data connects with the field reports. We already noted that satellite measurements showed a gradual decrease in flame size and intensity from 2018 onwards.
So the fire was already shrinking before the 2022 announcement.
It seems so. Quiet preparatory work was likely already underway. And by 2024 and 2025, the reports from travelers and, crucially, from longtime tour guides confirmed the trend dramatically. They said the intense, continuous sheet of flame has visibly broken up into scattered smaller pockets.
And what's the estimate on the intensity from those on the ground?
Core guides, the people who see this fire every week, they've estimated that the visible fire is less than half as intense as it was just 15 years ago. The roaring is becoming a flicker.
Which suggests the primary fuel source is finally being interrupted. How are they doing it? It can't be as simple as just throwing dirt on it.
Yeah. No, it's highly technical. It's focused on gas capture and diversion. The government statements indicate that the success is coming from strategic gas capture efforts, instead of trying to put out the existing fire directly.
Which would be incredibly difficult and dangerous.
They're focusing on intercepting the fuel source before it gets there.
So they're diverting the flow.
Yes. The primary method involves drilling a series of specialized wells around the perimeter of the crater. These wells are designed to intercept the fractured geological layers that are feeding the gas into that central pit.
And by capturing that gas, they can channel it through a controlled, productive route.
They're essentially starving the fire in the crater. They're turning an accidental flare into a controlled, captured resource.
It satisfies both the economic imperative recapturing that wasted fuel and the environmental goal of shrinking the accidental spectacle.
And this sets up a really profound final picture. The fiery, roaring, endless door to hell of legend may soon be an artifact of the past.
Future travelers might journey hours across the desert, only to find a much tamer sight.
The continuous inferno is being replaced by scattered, weak flames. And one day, the door to hell may not burn at all. Future visitors might just find a smoking hollow, a dark hole in the desert, marking the silent grave of a 50-year-long mistake.
We started this deep dive with a visual paradox. A terrifying geological spectacle that was entirely irrevocably human-made. We've navigated the whole story arc from the secretive Soviet origins and the conflicting histories.
To the surprising discovery of life thriving in the pit, the painful climate paradox of flaring methane, and finally the geopolitical symbolism of an uncontrollable icon that is now slowly being tamed.
The profound lesson of Darvaza seems to be about the long shadow of human infrastructure. It just demonstrates the stunning intergenerational consequences of a single engineering decision.
A few geologists, trying to solve an immediate safety problem, lit a fire that was visible from space for 5 decades. It permanently rewrote how the Earth looks and how the atmosphere is processed in that one specific location.
It's the ultimate monument to accidental power and waste. The door to hell is far less about a mythical portal to the underworld.
And far more about humanity's powerful and sometimes completely unintended capacity to rearrange the planet's fundamental processes in our pursuit of fossil fuels.
And this raises a crucial, lingering question for you, the listener. If we can light a massive, perpetual fire that lasts for decades with just one poorly handled drill hole in a remote desert,
What other long-term unintended consequences of our vast energy infrastructure of pipelines, storage facilities, capped wells are currently hidden from view, slowly unfolding around the globe, just waiting decades to finally reveal their true impact? The most terrifying geological events are often, in fact, the ones we create ourselves.